In September 1984, a 20-year-old woman was found dead in her small apartment in Flatonia, Texas. The official cause: suicide by autoerotic asphyxiation. The case was closed that same day, but there was a broken acrylic nail with blood near the door, a kitchen window shattered with the glass facing inward, and none of those details appeared in the sheriff's report. This is the case of Rowena Wilkinson Zappalack. Flatonia is one of those small towns in central Texas where everyone knows each other. In 1984, it had just over 1,000 inhabitants, a couple of bars, a tack shop, some families that had been living in the same county for generations. In that kind of place, the wealthy know the people at the courthouse, and the people at the courthouse, and the people at the courthouse know the people at the sheriff's department. Rowena was 20 years old. She had a 3-year-old son named Brandon. She was de facto separated from her husband, Thomas Zappalack. Although the divorce had not been formalized, she lived alone in a small studio located above a saddle shop. The door to that apartment did not have a conventional lock. Rowena would barricade it from the inside using a coffee table. On the morning she was found, someone had to force that door. What happened inside that apartment and what happened afterward in the official investigation is what Rowena's younger sister has been trying to answer for decades. Her name is Jolita Wilkinson. She was between 14 and 15 years old when her sister died. And she was the one who, many years later, requested the case file and noticed what was missing. There is something in this case that resists closure, not because obvious answers are lacking, but because the answers that exist do not fit with the scene described by the witnesses. To understand what happened to Rowena, one must first understand who she was. Rowena Wilkinson grew up in Flatonia. She was a young woman in a small town with a marriage that had not worked out and a child she had to raise on her own. Brandon was 3 years old at the time of her death. Rowena was his mother, his brother by, his primary caregiver, his reference point in the world. According to accounts from people who knew her, Rowena was not a woman who sought trouble. She was someone trying to stay afloat in difficult circumstances. The separation from Thomas Zappalack had not been easy. Thomas came from a family with weight in the community, with the kind of last name that in small towns either opens doors or closes them depending on who you know. The apartment where Rowena lived was modest, a studio above a tack shop in the center of Flatonia. It was not a place designed for a young woman with a child, but it was what she had. The door did not have a formal deadbolt. To sleep with some security, Rowena would push a coffee table against the frame. It was her system. It was her protection. That detail matters more than it seems. In the same year, in the same town, another woman disappeared. Her name was Melody Ann Bush. On the night of March 19th, 1984, Melody was at the Stag Club, a bar in Flatonia. According to the testimony of Florine, the bartender that night, Melody arrived in a visibly intoxicated state, seemed out of it, and told her that her husband was destroying the motel room where they were staying. Melody did not order any drinks. She left alone, and she did not come back. 12 days later, her body was found. 2 women, the same small town, the same year. Melody disappeared in March. Rowena died in September. Between those 2 dates, Flatonia continued its usual rhythm. The bars opened, the shops opened, the families with well-known last names continued to move through the same county, and there is one name that, according to subsequent journalistic investigation, appears connected to both women. A man whom we will call Cooper here. He was known to Thomas Zappalack. His parents had influential connections in the community. He was present the night Rowena died. He was never formally charged. He never spoke to investigators. There is also a third woman, identified only as Rhonda, who, according to that same journalistic investigation, may have been linked to Cooper. Details about Rhonda have not been publicly confirmed. That is all that is known about her for now. And that, for now, is important. Because what was found in Rowena's apartment that September morning was not what was recorded in the official report. And that difference between what was there and what was documented is the crack through which Jolita has been looking inward for decades. The morning they found Rowena Wilkinson Zappalack's body, the door to her apartment was locked from the inside. There was no lock. Rowena used a coffee table as a brace. Her close friends knew that. Those who lived nearby knew that. And that meant that for someone to force that door from the outside, they needed to know exactly how the system worked. It was September of 1984. Rowena was 20 years old. She lived alone in a small studio located above a saddle shop in Flatonia, Texas. Her son Brandon was 3 years old and was not with her that night. When the neighbor who found her arrived at the apartment, she had to force her way in. What she saw inside was recorded in the testimonies of those who were present. Rowena was in bed. There was a rope around her neck. There was a dildo on the bed. There was a dildo on the bed. She was wearing a twisted beads necklace. Coins were scattered across the floor. The kitchen window was broken, with the glass facing inward. And near the coffee table, there was a broken acrylic nail with traces of blood. The next day, Rowena's father handed that nail to Jolita, her younger sister, who was then between 14 and 15 years old. The father said he had already given it to investigators. Jolita kept it. Decades later, when Jolita requested the official case file, she looked for that nail in the evidence log. It was not there. The coins were not there either. The coins were not there either. The broken window was not there either. The case was closed on the same day of the death. Official cause: suicide by autoerotic asphyxiation. But there is something that does not fit with that conclusion. The autopsy confirmed that Rowena was missing the fourth nail from her right hand. The position was consistent with the acrylic nail found near the coffee table, the same table she used as a brace. If Rowena was harming herself in bed, there is no simple explanation for how a nail could appear broken next to the only entry point of the apartment. There is another detail. The day after the death, the shower water was still running. No one documented it as part of the investigation. These absences in the file, the nail, the coins, the window, the water, are not necessarily minor errors. In a death scene where the cause is determined within hours, what is not documented is as important as what does appear in the report. And this is where the timeline becomes complicated, because Rowena was not the only woman from Flatonia who died that year. 6 months before Rowena's death, on March 19, 1984, Melody Ann Bush was at the Stag Club. Florine, the bartender that night, recalled that Melody arrived visibly intoxicated, in a state she described as out of it. Melody told him that her husband was destroying the room at the Antlers Inn motel where they were staying. She didn't order any drinks, she left the bar alone, and she didn't come back. 12 days later, they found her body. Robert Bush, Melody's husband, was the main suspect according to subsequent investigations. They were together in that motel the night she disappeared. He was never formally charged, but there is a second name that appears in the records from that period. A man named Robert Charles Brown, a traveling silk flower salesman. He visited the Stag Club 1 or 2 times a month during 1984. In later years, Brown was convicted of 2 separate murders and is serving time in prison. From prison, starting in 2003, he began sending cryptic letters to authorities in the state of Colorado. In those letters, he claimed to have killed between 48 and 49 people. In 2004, when investigators specifically asked him about Melody Ann Bush, Brown wrote a single word in response: Flatonia. According to what was documented in subsequent journalistic investigations, when he was pressed about the method, specifically whether he had stabbed Melody with an ice pick, Brown, according to those sources, doubled down. Florine, however, did not recall seeing Brown in the bar the night Melody disappeared. That is the first knot. A man who claims to know something about Flatonia, in a year when 2 women died in that city, and a bartender who cannot confirm his presence on the key night. And then a third name appears. That third name is the one that changes the direction of everything. A subsequent journalistic investigation identified a man who will be referred to here as Cooper. He was a local man, known to Thomas Zappalack, Rowena's ex-husband. His parents had influential connections within the Flatonia community, and according to that investigation, Cooper was present the night Rowena died. It is not a name that appears in the official record. That is the fundamental difference. Robert Charles Brown is in the public record. His letters, his statements, his name are part of accessible documents. Cooper, on the other hand, was identified only through a journalistic investigation that came decades later. He was never charged. He was never arrested. He was never arrested. He never spoke with investigators. The same journalistic investigation indicated that Cooper might be linked not only to Rowena, but also to Melody Ann Bush, and a third woman identified only as Rhonda. Details about Rhonda have not been publicly confirmed, but the pattern suggested by that investigation is this: 3 women, the same geographical area, the same time period, and a man with a known surname in the community who was never formally interviewed. This is where the autoerotic suicide narrative fractures most visibly. If the scene of Rowena's apartment had been documented rigorously, there would be direct questions to answer. What explained the broken nail next to the door latch? What explained the glass from the window facing inward? What explained the scattered coins? These questions do not require a definitive answer about a culprit. They require, at the very least, a documented response. But the case was closed the same day. And when Jolita, Rowena's younger sister, began asking those questions decades later, what she found was a file with systematic absences. Not an isolated error, not a forgetfulness, an absence that encompassed exactly the elements that would have complicated the suicide conclusion. Jolita was between 14 and 15 years old when her sister died. She kept the acrylic nail that her father gave her. She kept it for years. And when she finally requested the file and compared what she had with what was documented, the difference was what led her to file a formal petition to reclassify Rowena's death certificate. That petition is still active. The county prosecutor expressed interest in the case. The Texas Rangers and the Texas Attorney General's office contacted Jolita to discuss the possibility of reopening the investigation. So far, no official steps have been confirmed. What Jolita has in her hands is a nail that does not appear in the file. What she has in front of her is a system that closed the case in hours. And what she has behind her is decades of unanswered questions about her older sister. That is what has shifted. Not a new witness, not a confession, a sister with a broken nail and a file with gaps, facing the institutions that should have done their job in 1984. First hypothesis: the official cause of death is suicide by autoerotic asphyxiation. That is the conclusion of the Fayette County file. Under this hypothesis, the elements found at the scene, the rope, the dildo, the collar, are consistent with a risky practice that ended fatally. The door was forced from the outside because Rowena had locked it from the inside, which would fit with someone seeking privacy. The problems with this hypothesis are what Jolita has documented. A broken nail next to the door latch has no natural explanation within that narrative. The glass from the kitchen window pointing inward does not either. And the fact that those elements do not appear in the official file does not eliminate them as evidence. It removes them from the record, which is something different. This hypothesis cannot be formally dismissed because it was never subjected to complete scrutiny. That is its central weakness. Second hypothesis: Cooper was present on the night of Rowena's death. That is what subsequent investigative journalism indicates. If that premise is accepted, the scene takes on a different reading. The nail next to the latch would suggest resistance at that specific point. The scattered coins would suggest a struggle. The broken window with glass pointing inward would suggest a point of entry or alteration of the scene. Under this hypothesis, closing the case in hours without documenting those elements would not be a procedural failure. It would be a decision, and the influence of Cooper's family in the Flatonia community would be the context that would make that decision possible. This hypothesis also lacks formal confirmation. Cooper was never charged. There is no direct forensic evidence linking him, the investigative journalism that identified him. did not produce a charge, and no one from the case's environment, including Cooper himself, spoke with that investigation. Third hypothesis, Robert Charles Brown frequented the Stag Club during 1984. He wrote the word Flatonia when asked about Melody Ann Bush. According to the documentation, he responded in a way that suggested knowledge about the method of her death. If Brown was in Flatonia that year and killed Melody, the question that arises is whether his activity that year was limited to a single case. But there is a critical limit to this hypothesis. Florine, the only direct witness from the night Melody disappeared from the Stag Club, did not remember Brown in the bar that night. Brown was never formally charged in connection with Melody or Rowena, and Rowena's case, according to all documented evidence, has not been officially connected to Brown at any time. This hypothesis is the most speculative of the three. Its only verifiable anchor is the word Flatonia, written by a man who claims to have killed dozens of people. That is not evidence. It is a statement without direct corroboration. What connects these three hypotheses is not an answer. It is a question that no one rigorously asked in 1984. What really happened in that apartment above the saddle shop? That question has gone unanswered for 4 decades, and as long as it remains unanswered, Rowena Wilkinson Zappalack is classified as a suicide in the records of Fayette County, Texas. Rowena Wilkinson Zappalack's death certificate still classifies her death as a suicide. That has not changed in 4 decades. But the status of the case in recent years has begun to move in ways that did not occur in 1984. Jolita Wilkinson filed a formal petition to reclassify her sister's death certificate. That petition remains active. The Fayette County District Attorney expressed interest in reviewing the file. The Texas Rangers and the Texas Attorney General's office contacted Jolita to discuss the possibility of reopening the case. None of those contacts have produced a confirmed official step so far, but the fact that those institutions have initiated communication with the family is in itself something that did not happen during the first 30 years after Rowena's death. What Jolita documented in her private investigation is not minor. 3 elements from the scene: the broken acrylic nail with blood, the coins scattered on the floor, and the kitchen window broken with glass inside, do not appear in the official sheriff's report. Rowena's father handed over the nail the day after her death, but there is no record of that piece being processed as evidence. The autopsy confirmed that Rowena's right hand's 4th nail was missing. The physical correspondence was there. The follow-up was not. Cooper, the person of interest identified by a subsequent journalistic investigation, was never charged, arrested, or indicted. He did not speak with the investigators who identified him. His parents had influential connections in the Flatonia community. That context does not imply guilt, but it does explain, at least in part, why an investigation closed on the same day of the death was never institutionally questioned for decades. Robert Charles Brown remains in prison serving sentences for 2 separate murders. He was never formally charged in connection with Rowena or with Melody Ann Bush. The word Flatonia that he wrote in response to questions about Melody did not produce charges. The connection between Brown and either of the 2 cases in Flatonia remains unconfirmed officially. The case of Melody Bush has also not been publicly resolved. Her husband, Robert Bush, was the main suspect in her disappearance, but he was never formally charged. Florine, the bartender at the Stag Club, testified that Melody left the bar alone that night, intoxicated, saying that her husband was destroying the motel room. 12 days later, someone found her body. The circumstances of that discovery are not fully documented in the available records. Flatonia is a small town. In 1984, 2 women died under circumstances that were not rigorously investigated. 40 years later, one of those deaths remains officially a suicide. The other remains without a conviction, and a sister who was 14 years old when she lost Rowena has spent decades doing the work that the institutions did not do. Rowena Wilkinson Zappalack was 20 years old. She had a 3-year-old son named Brandon. She lived alone in a small studio above a saddle shop in Flatonia, Texas. That is all that should matter for someone to investigate her death seriously. It was not. What Jolita Wilkinson has built over decades, first with questions, then with documents, and then with documents, and then with a formal petition, is the argument that the system should have constructed in September 1984. A broken nail with blood, a broken window with glass inward, scattered coins that no one explained, water running the next day, a door that needed to be forced open. Those facts were not recorded in the official report. Those facts were not recorded in the official report, not because they didn't exist, because no one looked for them. There is something about this case that doesn't add up. It's not just the absence of evidence in the file. It's that the evidence that did exist, physical, verifiable, present at the scene, was ignored the same day the decision was made to close the case as a suicide. That speed, that certainty, without investigation, is what makes this file so difficult to accept as definitive. Jolita has not stopped that petition. The Texas Rangers and the Texas Attorney General's office have opened communication. The county prosecutor has expressed interest. None of those moves guarantee justice, but they mean that the question Jolita has been asking for 4 decades is no longer being asked alone. Rowena Wilkinson Zappalack deserves an answer. Brandon, who was 3 years old when he lost his mother, deserves an answer. And as long as the death certificate still says suicide without anyone having proven that it was, that answer is still pending. This show is made by Oba Media.